My family died on Christmas. My grandmother always taught me to see the good in things. I always see people for the things they've gone through, always see animals as people too unless I was in a dire moment of survival, always turn the other cheek, etc., etc. Growing up, I would never even think of hurting someone. I grew up shy and timid. Whenever moments called for conflict, I'd always do my best to steer away from the situation entirely. However, as time went on and years passed, I came to the realization that people were not to be looked at as the things they had gone through. The things people have gone through are what mold them into the people they are today. Look at Kim Jong-un. Do you think that if the Kim family had been born in the United States, they'd still have the same views that they have today? It's all about the people who teach you and the environments that you grow up in. Unfortunately for me, the love that once flowed through the veins of my family, like the very blood that binds us together, very gradually became clotted with sticky dark clumps of black tar heroin. Poverty tore the family that I loved apart, and with poverty comes a want to escape, and very quickly can that want become a need. Unluckily for us, minds can easily be broken and discouraged. So once that want for escape became a need in my family, minds were broken beyond repair. And so what did my loved ones turn to? The hardest drugs and the strongest alcohol they could get their hands on. I, being the innocent, loving, little 8-year-old that I was, could only love these people so much before my mind, too, began to break. For years, I watched the people that I cared the most about tear each other apart in order to get the money for their next hit. And for years, my heart grew colder and colder with each passing winter of watching my family struggle on Christmas. Finally, on my 16th Christmas, my mind had finally snapped. My mother had set the table in our tiny little home in a way that made my shack of a house feel like a mansion. The ham had been cooked to perfection on our rundown oven heating system, and the sides of mashed potatoes, corn, and green bean casserole smelled absolutely delectable. The Christmas tree stood as decorated as a 5-star general in the front window of our quaint home. And from the outside, looking in, I'm sure we looked like a symbol of hope for a better life in our house that my mother worked so hard to make a home. It looked nice, and it felt nice too. Through all the hardships faced in my family, my mother had stood strong and did everything she possibly could in order to support me and my brother. Put a roof over our heads and made sure that we had a delicious dinner every Thanksgiving and Christmas. Everything was quiet and calm and meditative, and me, my brother, and my mother felt relaxed. All of a sudden, my drugged out of his mind father came falling through the front door, cutting the silence like a sword to a single thread of silk. He was off his rocker spewing nonsense about being invisible and how he could feel the bugs in his brain and blah, blah, blah. We'd heard it all 1,000 times before, and all we wanted was to have a decent Christmas. My mother couldn't stand it anymore, so she snapped, screaming at the top of her lungs about how much of an awful man he was, how awful of a father he was, and how half-assed his apologies and love felt. I'd heard this conversation too, 1,000 times, so I was pretty desensitized to the whole thing at this point, which made what happened next all the more shocking. My father had silenced my mother's screams by punching her so hard she fell into our tree and completely crushed all of the gifts underneath. I'd seen my father push my mother, or even shove my mother full force for that matter. But never had I seen him punch my mother. I was distraught. My mother was on the ground still. She had been struck pretty hard, so she was moving, but she wasn't getting up. My brother had run to his room crying in fear of my father, and my father himself was still in his drug-enforced rage, trashing the living room and going on and on about, "Look what you made me do," and "I hate when you make me do this." Enough was enough. I'd watched my mother cry too many tears, and I'd felt too much pain myself. I grabbed the knife that had been used to carve my mother's ham, walked past her lying broken on the ground, grabbed my father by what remained of the hair on top of his head, and let the serrated teeth of the blade chew through his Adam's apple, as if the steel were a junkie looking for his next hit within my dad's throat. My mother was too battered to notice until the once noise-filled room fell silent. She looked up at me, horrified and quivering. Blood stained the window in front of me, and my father's dripping corpse lay on the floor, still bleeding out of the wound I'd created. The fear I saw in my mother's eyes exceeded the fear she had when my father punched her. It exceeded the fear she had in her eyes when her own brother shot at her during a separate rampage. The fear my mother was exhibiting exceeded any fear that I had ever seen painted on her face, and I couldn't do it. I ran as fast as I could out of my house. I immediately made my way into the woods because, of course, I did just kill a man. And when I heard the screeching of police sirens, I made my way deeper into those woods. The state of my mother and the house must have been enough to cause commotion at the station, because wow, it sounded like every cop in the town was headed my way. I mean, when a full-grown man punches and knocks your mother into a crumpled mess on top of the Christmas tree, surely they'd be able to show some compassion for a kid in that circumstance, even if the following circumstance was even more horrid. Anyway, I walked and walked and walked in these woods until I was certain that I was far away from home. Now, when I say far away from home, I don't mean I made it 2 or 3 states away. No, I made it about 3 or 4 cities away at the very most. I had to cross over some main streets and populated areas in between my ducks off into the woods, but I made it somewhere where it was very unlikely I would be recognized straight away by people. That being said, I had to be extremely careful when it came to my decision-making and planning. I had to get up off the ground somehow. I was still moderately close to my home and wanted for murder, so I decided I was going to get the essentials I needed with the small $500 in savings that I'd managed to muster up from my part-time work at PetSmart. Then I was going to make my way further across the country. I bought about $15 worth of ramen, 15 on Chef Boyardee, purchased a 15-pack of socks for $20, went to a Goodwill and spent $100 on shirts and bottoms. Then decided to keep what I had left and use it along the way to wherever it was I was headed. I was down to $237.56. I used $190 of what remained and got myself a bus ticket that went from Atlanta to Aspen. A 42-hour trip that I was going to have to spend thinking about every decision I'd made that had led me exactly to where I was at this point in my life. I thought hard about life. My grandmother's want to always do good had rubbed off on me, but the school of life had scrubbed me clean of those preachings. Money makes this world go round, and the only thing that holds a man back from having nothing is having a family to be there for him, and my family was lost about 2 days ago. On top of that, my pockets were completely empty aside from what remained of the savings that I had almost completely blown through trying to get to where I was. I had to find a way to make my money, stay as well hidden as possible, get a roof over my head, and somehow find a way to get as far away from my current identity as possible. All of these thoughts were circulating through my mind as I rode along and made my way towards the mountains. Everything on the bus ride had been going pretty much perfectly. Well, as perfectly as a several-state bus ride could go, but we'd stopped multiple times at rest stops for the other passengers to get snacks and relieve themselves. I myself only went when I felt it absolutely necessary. However, something had gone terribly wrong once we entered the Arkansas highway system. Now, I don't know how much you know about Arkansas, but their roads are absolute garbage. Even before things had gone downhill, my head was banging and slanging back and forth from the bumps and potholes in the road. About an hour and a half after crossing over into the land of opportunity, the bus very opportunistically bounced over a massive pothole directly in the middle of US 278. The Greyhound began screeching and rumbling on its left side, followed by the rhythmic F-wump, F-wump, F-wump of the rear left tire. Fuck, I thought to myself as we veered over to the side of the road. I knew that a bus on the side of the road breaking down was definitely going to force any passing cop to pull over alongside us, even if it was just to make sure everything was in order. I knew that the officer, or officers for that matter, would also more than likely come aboard the bus to check on the well-being of the passengers, and I really could not risk any person with a badge even so much as spotting me. So as the bus came to a stop, before the driver could even begin to address the passengers, I faked a severe case of motion sickness and powered my way off the bus. I even began throwing up by thinking about what I'd done and about my current situation. I think I sold it pretty well, but who knows? I ended up telling the driver that I was gonna make a call, and as he was announcing what the next course of action was to the rest of the passengers, I made my way further and further off the main road, pretending to be talking to someone with my hand pressed to my face, hoping no one would notice my lack of phone. Seeing as how this was an interstate highway and not just some small town back road, I didn't have much of an option when it came to hiding myself. I mean, there was a little section of woods that I could sort of use to get out of the way of the thousands of passing cars. But past that, I was quite literally walking through people's backyards. Now I have at least some sense left in me at this point. I'm being extra precautious about where I step because now I'm actively trespassing. And if some sketched-out woman, home with her kids, sees me walking through their yard, then I'm 100% getting the cops called on me. And then once that happens, I knew my description would match the description of the murderer of my father back home, and the police would swarm my area. After making it about 10 miles or so from where I departed my bus, I finally found some more forest to hide in. I walked and walked again, only this time I didn't have to walk nearly as far because thanks to some miracle of God, I found a town that was perfect to hide out in until I regained my bearings. It wasn't too small to where if there was absolutely any suspicion, the whole population would know within an hour, but it also wasn't so big that I'd have to worry about recognition. I cautiously made my way into the town and found a park with a pavilion. Around this point, it was getting dark out, so I figured I'd just hang out in the park until the sun went down, then I'd take shelter underneath the pavilion for the night. Which is exactly what I did. I sat on the swings just contemplating everything until the light faded. Then I made my way back to my home for the night and laid down on the bench trying to get some sleep. The next morning when I awoke, it was rainy and misty. Everything was so muggy, and it seriously made me not even want to try for the day and instead just hang out in solace or something. But alas, I left the park and started making my way around the town in search of work. I had to do something. I couldn't just keep ducking off in the woods and hiding in parks. So the conscious decision was made to look for low-key employment. To make a long story short, I found a newspaper ad for a guy who wanted help cleaning out his attic. It was just a one-time job, and he was paying $100 for the day, so what the hell, right? I helped the old guy out and collected my payment, which gave me enough money to pay for a hotel for the night. But guess what? That fucking hotel stay put me right back down to where I was a fucking gain, and this time there was no newspaper ad to get me another night's stay. This shit was getting ridiculous, and I wasn't about to stay in the situation I was in. I had made it this far without a hitch in the non-existent plan, so all I really needed to do was keep stepping until I eventually landed on solid ground. My grandmother and her teachings were dead. The me that had existed prior to all of this was dead. I wasn't going to continue being this helpless, scared little child. I had just traveled halfway across the country by myself. I had hidden away from law enforcement by myself. I got justice for my mother and brother and had ended a cancer that was eating away at my family by myself. Oh no, I wasn't about to give up when I had made it this far. This world was, and still is, sick. Only back then, I had no intention of being a part of the world's cruel game anymore. I remembered the addiction that tortured my family. I remembered the poverty that tortured my family. I remembered seeing what lengths people would go to for the fix of their next hit, and I was going to extort every single thing that had extorted me for my entire life. With the $107 I had left, I bought a mask, a toy gun, and some black spray paint. I painted the gun to look identical to a real gun, so much so that if the police had seen me with it, that would have been the end of my journey right then and there. I took the gun and the mask, changed into some all-black clothing from the Goodwill stash, and went out looking for someone unlucky enough to be working behind the gas station counter for the third shift. My first stop was a BP on the outskirts of the town, just right before the main road. I got exactly what I needed from the clerk. The prop gun had worked perfectly. After that, I figured that since everything had moved so smoothly and swiftly with the first robbery, I might as well try my luck again with a second store. I made my way, this time, into a convenience store also near the outskirts of town, but on the other side of the town a few blocks away. Again, Everything worked perfectly. Just me in the store, no cars around, and a tired cashier who isn't willing to risk his life over a store that isn't his. I made off with the money from his register back to the woods. Only this time I was going into the woods with a little over $700 in my pocket. Also this time, I didn't have to walk extraneously far. I dipped 2 towns over because let's face it, who cares about a gas station getting robbed 2 towns over by an unnamed assailant that could have been anybody? Plus the gun and the mask had been dumped and buried under as many rocks as I could find in a stream in the middle of the woods. I had no reason to not be confident right now. I knew I could make something work with what money I had in my pocket. Dawn was rolling in around the time that I got into town, though, which meant that there would be considerably more people out and about. I didn't want to get too careless, but also, I was done with spending my nights in the woods. I found another hotel, this one being $150 for the night, so I paid for my room and just hid out trying to come up with a plan on what to do next. I wasn't gonna let my mind fail me. Too many massive risks had been taken for me to even be up here, so I was racking my brain. At some point, while laying on the bed thinking, I saw a small little dot on the wall. It was a spider. Spiders have always creeped me out, and I've always hated them, but today for some reason I felt at peace with the little fella. However, I did not want this thing in my room. I grabbed a coffee cup from the little hotel room desk, along with a paper towel to put under it. I slid the spider into the cup and sealed the top with the paper towel before letting it out on the balcony. Today you, tomorrow me, I whisper with a slight chuckle, before returning to bed and getting some much-needed sleep.